They found the rusted Colt revolver in the summer of 1904, half buried in the red dirt beside Thomas Brennan's grave in the cemetery outside Vermilion, Arizona. The headstone had weathered to almost nothing, but the gun was placed there deliberately, wrapped in oilcloth like a promise kept. The sheriff held it up to the light, turned the cylinder. 5 empty chambers, one still loaded. "Who buries a gun beside a dead man?" the deputy asked. The old gravedigger just shook his head. "Same person who's been coming here every month for 23 years. Always at dusk, always alone." But the real story, the one that haunts the wind through those Arizona plains, began long before that summer day. It began in 1881, when a woman named Eleanor Brennan watched her husband ride out of town with a secret he never should have carried. Vermilion was the kind of town the desert tried to swallow. Dust on every breath, sun that cracked wood and skin alike. The saloon doors squeaked their lonesome song, and the wind carried voices that had no business being remembered. Eleanor Brennan lived on the edge of town, in a house her husband built with his own hands. White clapboard, blue shutters, a porch swing that sang in the breeze like a hymn nobody wanted to finish. Thomas was a quiet man, a telegraph operator. Decent, the kind who tipped his hat to widows and never raised his voice in church. People liked him the way you like good weather. You don't think about it much, but you notice when it's gone. But Eleanor knew something nobody else did. She'd found the photograph 3 weeks before he died. It was tucked inside his Bible, between Psalms and Proverbs, a small tin daguerreotype of a woman Eleanor had never seen. Young, dark-haired, standing beside a ranch house somewhere green, somewhere that wasn't Arizona. On the back, in faded ink, Sarah, Colorado, 1876. Eleanor held that photograph by candlelight and felt the floor drop out from under her world.
Reverend Calhoun noticed Eleanor's silence that Sunday. She sat in the back pew, hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing. After the service, he found her standing alone by the graveyard gate. "Mrs. Brennan," he said gently, "you carry a heavy spirit today." Eleanor looked at him with eyes that had stopped asking questions. "Reverend, if you loved someone and then learned they were someone else entirely, would that love still be real?" The old preacher was quiet for a long time. The wind rattled through the crosses and wooden markers. "Love is real, Eleanor, even when built on sand. But truth has a way of settling accounts." She nodded once, turned toward home. The Reverend watched her go, and later he'd say he felt something wrong in the air that day, like the sky before lightning. It was a Tuesday, October 12th, 1881. Thomas came home pale, wouldn't meet Eleanor's eyes. He moved through the house like a man packing for a long journey. "Where are you going?" Eleanor asked, voice steady as stone. "Got a wire," Thomas said, buckling his gun belt. "Emergency up at the relay station. I'll be back by morning." Eleanor stood in the doorway, the photograph hidden in her apron pocket. She watched him saddle his horse, watched him check his revolver, a Colt .45 he'd carried since the war. "Thomas." He stopped, turned. "You ever loved someone so much it burned holes in your soul?" Thomas looked at her for a long, terrible moment. The kind of moment where everything unsaid fills the space between two people like smoke. "Love don't burn, Eleanor," he finally said, voice rough. "It just don't die easy." Then he rode into the dark, and she never saw him alive again.
Eleanor received the telegram at dawn. Thomas Brennan, stop. Killed in ambush, stop. Body at Tucson Station, stop. Authorities investigating. She read it 3 times, folded it, put it in her apron beside the photograph. The house was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. She walked to Thomas's desk, opened the locked drawer with the key he thought she didn't know about. Inside, letters, dozens of them, all from Colorado, all from Sarah. My dearest Thomas, I cannot bear another winter alone. When will you come home? The children ask for their father. Eleanor's hands didn't shake. They should have, but they were steady as she read about the life Thomas had before her, the wife he'd abandoned, the 2 children, a boy and a girl he'd left behind when he fled west under a new name after a business deal went sour. Thomas Brennan wasn't Thomas Brennan at all. He was James Mitchell, a deserter, a man running from debts and family both. And someone had finally caught up with him.
They buried him on a Thursday, under a sky the color of old bruises. 12 people came. The Reverend said kind words about a man he'd never truly known. Eleanor stood alone beside the grave in her black dress, holding a single white lily. After everyone left, she knelt in the dirt. I loved you, she whispered to the fresh-turned earth. God help me, I loved you anyway. She reached into her bag and pulled out his Colt revolver, the one the authorities had returned with his effects. She'd cleaned it, oiled it, loaded 5 chambers and left one empty, the way Thomas always did for safety. Then she wrapped it in oilcloth and buried it beside his coffin, her hands deep in the red Arizona clay. You ran your whole life, so I'm giving you something to fight with, in case the past catches up to you again, even in the dark.
3 days later, a woman arrived in Vermilion on the westbound stage. She was older than the photograph. Gray streaked her dark hair, but Eleanor recognized her instantly. Sarah Mitchell stood in Eleanor's doorway, 2 teenagers behind her, a boy with Thomas's jaw, a girl with his green eyes. You're her, Sarah said, not a question. I am. He wrote to me, 2 years ago. Said he wanted to come home, make things right. Sarah's voice cracked. I was gonna let him, fool that I am. Eleanor stepped aside. Come in. They sat at the kitchen table, drinking bitter coffee as the children waited on the porch. 2 women who loved the same ghost. Did you know, Sarah asked, about us? Not until after. Eleanor's voice was quiet. He kept you hidden, like shame, like love. I can't tell which anymore. Sarah looked at her hands. He always was good at hiding. He was good at running, Eleanor corrected. There's a difference. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind testing the windows. I buried his gun with him, the one he carried in the war. I thought he might need it, wherever he is. Sarah's eyes welled. You loved him. I loved someone. Whether it was really him, I'll never know. Sarah reached across the table. Their hands met in the middle. 2 women bound by a man who'd never been whole enough for either of them. Come to the grave with me, Eleanor said. He owes you a goodbye too. They stood together in the cemetery at dusk. Eleanor, Sarah, and the 2 children who'd never known their father. The boy was 16, angry. He left us with nothing. He left you with life, Eleanor said gently. That's something, even if it doesn't feel like enough. The girl, younger, knelt by the grave. Why'd you bury the gun, ma'am? Eleanor looked at the horizon where the sun bled into the earth. Because your father spent his whole life running from ghosts, I wanted him to have a fighting chance if they followed him into the next world." "You think there's a next world?" Sarah asked. "I have to," Eleanor said. "Otherwise all this hurt means nothing." The wind rose, carrying dust and memory across the graves. Somewhere in town, a piano played badly. A dog barked. Life continued its careless way. Sarah placed a hand on the headstone. James Mitchell, born 1845, died 1881. Rest if you can. Eleanor closed her eyes. "Thomas Brennan, may you become the man you pretended to be." In the summer of 1904, when they found that rusted Colt revolver, Eleanor Brennan was 67 years old, still visiting the grave every month, still placing wildflowers, still keeping her vigil. The sheriff came to her house, revolver in hand. "Mrs. Brennan, we found this by your husband's grave. You know anything about it?" Eleanor, white-haired now, smiled faintly. "That was his. I buried it there the day we laid him to rest." "Ma'am, with respect, why?" She looked past him, toward the cemetery, toward the desert that held so many secrets. "Because we all fight battles nobody sees, Sheriff. His just followed him further than most. I wanted him armed for the journey." The sheriff nodded slowly, handed her the gun. "Reckon it belongs to you, then." Eleanor took it, felt its weight. Lighter than she remembered, or maybe she'd grown stronger, carrying other burdens. That evening, she walked to the grave one last time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of loss and glory. She knelt in the dust, placed the revolver back in the earth. "Rest now, Thomas, or James, whoever you were. The fight's over for both of us." She patted the dirt smooth, like tucking in a child. Then Eleanor Brennan walked home through the purple dusk, leaving the past where it belonged, buried but not forgotten, armed but finally at peace. They say the West keeps its secrets. Every scar, every promise, every whispered trail. Some rode for vengeance, others for love, but a few just to find peace beneath the dying sun. Eleanor Brennan never remarried. She lived another 12 years, died in her sleep in the house Thomas built. They buried her beside him, and if you visit that cemetery outside Vermilion today, if you can find it, half swallowed by sage and sand, you'll see 2 headstones weathered down to whispers. Between them, legend says, a gun still rests in the red earth, one chamber loaded, just in case. The desert remembers. It always does. Would you have done the same? Subscribe for more tales from Whispering Trails under the Wild West limits.